Joining me now is our friend Geoff Magliocchetti. Jeff, thanks so much for coming back. Always a pleasure having you on, and I hope you're someplace warm because it has been brutally cold outside.
Well, alas, I'm still stationed in the Garden State, but nothing wrong with that, of course, weather notwithstanding. But Mike, thank you for having me. Always a pleasure to join the program.
Always our pleasure. Here we are in January, and I want to start by talking about the New York Rangers. We've seen a resurgence in them since the start of the new year. This month they've won 6 of 10, and that's better than it sounds because 3 of those 4 losses were in overtime. So they're really waking up, they're competitive, and their playoff hopes may still be alive.
Yeah, Mike, what's interesting about this stretch is that if you condense it just a little further, the Rangers are 5-0-3 in their past 8, getting points in each of those games, at least once. So I think what's interesting about this now is that it brings them just a little closer to what this team was kind of supposed to be. And there are positive and negative connotations behind that. Last season, everything seemed to align for the Rangers in the sense that there were so many coincidences to 1994. Everyone seemed to be firing on all cylinders at the perfect time. Everything seemed to be forming towards, the ultimate triumph. But unfortunately, as we all know, it ended with the Game 6 loss to the Florida Panthers in the conference finals. So this time around, the Rangers more or less opted to stick to the status quo. Their biggest offseason acquisition was Riley Smith. They really didn't do anything radical in terms of player movement. Maybe added a couple more rookies to the fold, see what they can do. But what this team has been able to do, what this team was supposed to do, perhaps, was form perhaps a bit of a last dance situation in the sense that this probably would be, one of the final, if not the final run for this core, headlined by Mika Zibanejad, Artemi Panarin, Chris Kreider. This was meant to be perhaps their final true shot at a championship. And it was jarring to see how far things had fallen in November and December. Games seemed over before they ever truly began. There were guys who, frankly, just didn't look like they seemed to care out there. January has rolled around, and Keandre Miller kind of foreshadowed what was coming along. He felt that the holiday break would be a bit of a turning point for this group, and they come out of the gate. They give up 7 goals to the league-leading Washington Capitals, who isn't these days. But at the same time, they've really started to pull together as a unit, and dig themselves out of this hole. But what's interesting about this Rangers group is that they're still in a situation where if the top men aren't scoring, then it's going to be a one and done perhaps in the playoffs out there. But we're seeing contributions from the bottom portions of the lineup, especially after we saw some guys like Jacob Trouba and Capo Caco go to Anaheim and Seattle respectively. But we've seen guys step up in the bottom 6 out there. Will Cooley needs no further elaboration. What he's been able to do has been fantastic. Sam Carrick on the 4th line has been a tremendous offensive generator out there. Adam Edstrom starting to come into his own after him there. But we are starting to see some of the top line guys kind of rediscover their spark, rediscover their game back a little bit. Mika Zibanejad was doing pretty well until Saturday when he missed 2 breakaway chances in a shootout attempt out in Columbus, but he was starting to find his rhythm a little bit. So is Artemi Panarin, guys like Adam Fox as well. But there's a lot to be excited about from this Rangers group because it's not like they're winning like the way we've seen so many Ranger teams win in the past. Score an early goal, know you have Igor Shesterkin and or Henrik Lundqvist in net, pray for the best. That's not the case. The Rangers are not only winning, they are outplaying some very solid competition out there. They outplay teams like Las Vegas, teams like New Jersey for 2 or 3 periods. And, we've seen some strong efforts from this group. We are at the very least at a point where no Ranger game, for better or worse, is truly over, much like we saw on Sunday against Montreal, where they scored 4 goals, took 4 leads, but unfortunately fell in overtime in that one. So we are at the least at a point where no Ranger game is truly over, for better or worse. Let's see where the Rangers trend in this direction. Another and very interesting stretch awaits this week. They have a 4-game homestand, starting with games against teams that they are chasing in the wild card hunt. Teams who they are either chasing or close by. That Eastern Conference wild card race is very tightly compacted. They picked up 3 big points this weekend with the 1-0 shootout win over Columbus. Columbus was holder of of one of the wild cards entering Saturday play, and they will face Ottawa and Philadelphia this week. Major opportunities. Eager to see what they're able to do with it.
Indeed. Now, switching over to basketball, the Unrivaled League just started its inaugural season. It's a 3-on-3 women's basketball league that features several of the New York Liberty players. How important is this, not only for women's basketball, but for the New York Liberty, whose players still get to be in the spotlight right after winning their first championship?
I think this is a great opportunity for all parties involved. From the women's basketball side, it really needs no further explanation at this point. It's turning women's basketball into a year-long affair, similar to what the NFL is doing. Obviously, they're not at the level of success the NFL is having quite just yet, but at the same time, it does keep women's basketball in the national conversation for a longer time. They have some strong partners, strong investors behind them, including a media deal with TNT Sports, where you've been able to see the games. But between the WNBA's progress, women's college basketball steadily coming on the rise. We've seen some excellent parity in there. We've seen, it used to be, UConn or Tennessee, UConn or Tennessee, UConn or Tennessee. Now we're seeing teams like South Carolina rise to the occasion. We've seen UCLA, they're 18-0 this time around. So it's great to see these teams, these programs rise up. But Unrivaled is continuing that conversation. It's continuing the professional conversation. That way, the names of these women stay in the headlines. It stays on people's television screens. So overall, it's a great trend for women's basketball. And that brings to the Liberty conversation. As you mentioned, there are 3 participants from New York. Co-founder Breanna Stewart founding this league with, ironically enough, fellow UConn alumna and 2024 WNBA Finals rival Nafisa Collier. So this is their project, and so far, and they're joined by Sabrina Ionescu and Courtney Vandersloot. The team so far, Stewart and Vandersloot are on Mist BC. Ionescu was a late entrant to Phantom BC. So far, both teams are 0-2, but I think we're seeing some very interesting developments from the Unrivaled, especially from a Liberty perspective. This is especially key for Ionescu, who I believe could serve as a case study for this league. Naysayers will look at Unrivaled and say, what is the point of this league? What are we supposed to do with this? Are you really going to send someone to, say, the Hall of Fame with an Unrivaled championship? But here's what's interesting about Unrivaled. It can really work in Ionescu's case. Whereas Ionescu would either be sitting idle or contemplating playing overseas, remember, she just overcame a procedure on her hand during the off season. Got it on her birthday, as a matter of fact, in December, as a matter of fact. So how interesting is that? This is an interesting case for Ionescu because now she can find a fantastic form of rehab. She can play, it's an elite form of rehab where she can play against the best, she can play against familiar competition, and we're seeing it so far. Last night in Phantom's game, for example, she was 7-12 from the field, really working the mid-range game, and she had a direct role through either points, assists, or possessions created via rebound. She played a role in 33 of Phantom's 71 points last night. So she can be a very interesting case study for this. And Stewie and Courtney are really working their chemistry as well. Courtney is also making her free agency case, and this is a great place for the players to mingle. Many players we've spoken to have described this as a college setting, and it's really interesting to see that it brings 36 of the best athletes in women's basketball, 36 talented women with their own with their own brands of talents and personalities out there. It's a really interesting site, and we're just a week into this, and we've seen some tremendous innovations, such as the targeted score. We've seen the smaller court. We've seen free throws being worth either 1, 2, or 3 points, a single free throw to add each trip, of course. We've seen that in the G League, but it's very interesting to see players at an elite talent level, recognizable talents, use it in this form.
Now, while we're on the subject of basketball, let's talk about your team, the New York Knicks. Red hot in December, a few more losses than they would have liked so far in January. Tonight, it's a Subway Series against the Nets. What do you make of the month they've had so far, and what can we expect in the game against the Nets tonight?
They've certainly fallen back to earth a little bit from a Knicks perspective. They had that 9 game winning streak in December, which you look back on it, there was a lot of quote unquote bullying in there. Lots of beating, lots of taking advantage of less fortunate teams in there. But you know what? I'm not going to rip them for it because good teams, great teams, know how to do the ordinary things extraordinarily well. Now what's interesting about this Knicks team now is that they have yet to generate any form of winning streak in the new year so far. They have yet to win consecutive games, but there's a prime opportunity to do that tonight against a Nets team that is clearly playing out the stretch, clearly counting down the days until the draft lottery where they hope to land, Cooper Flag. But it's also special because this will be Mikal Bridges' return to Brooklyn after that blockbuster deal over the summer. So that'll be something to keep an eye on for sure. And Bridges has had an intriguing legacy thus far in Manhattan, in the sense that when he's on, he looks fantastic, but when he's off, it's quite noticeable, and it's noticeable in opposing shot percentages and whatnot. The Knicks were at a point where they had struggled to beat the top teams in this league. That changed, I believe it was last Sunday, when they took down the Milwaukee Bucks in just dominant fashion, and that could serve as an intriguing turning point for the Knicks. They win that game, I believe it was 140 to 106. They win that game, and they do so while Jalen Brunson endures a bit of an injury scare, endures a bit of a shoulder scare, goes back to the locker room, comes back out, finishes off a sterling performance, an excellent job by Brunson, who's really starting to come into his own out there. And what's surprising to me is that, Karl Anthony Towns has not been generating a larger MVP case, because he is, for better and worse, he has put the V in MVP out there. So this is excellent. So, but one thing the Knicks, I do envision them doing is making a move at the deadline. I'm not sure if there is a move out there that the Knicks can truly catapult themselves above the Bostons, above the Clevelands of the world to kind of, push that forward. But there are smaller things they can do, because depth scoring has been a bit of a problem for them this season. Cameron Payne has come into his own a little bit, but he has kind of struggled to build any sort of lasting role in the rotation. I think it was on Friday night, I believe, against Detroit. He no, last week against Detroit. It was earlier in the week. He scored about he had a solid game scoring wise. He scored 16 points in the first half, but only took one shot the rest of the game in the second half. So it'll be interesting to see if Tom Thibodeau breaks his long-standing rules and kind of expands his rotation a little bit. We did get to see a hint of that in yesterday's game against the Atlanta Hawks, a little holiday matinee at the Garden. We got to see Thibodeau play 9 men in the first quarter, which is unheard of in a Thibodeau system. So it's all going to come down to a little bit of hubris, a little bit of breaking the norms. The Knicks are developing chemistry, but it might be time to dissolve at least some of this group. And the most tradable asset, ironically enough, is Mitchell Robinson. Robinson is by far the longest tenured Knick on this group at 7 years, but he has yet to play this season due to ankle injuries. So, but he stands as the most tradable asset, with most of their draft pick cabinet used up in the respective deals for Towns and Bridges over the summer. So it'll be interesting to see what they do with what they do with Robinson, who they appear to be keeping on the roster because they're not sure what they're going to do with the rest of the backup centers. Precious Achiuwa has done fairly well. Jericho Sims does well rebounding, but there's clearly a lot to be desired on the offensive end when he steps in for Towns in the starting five. Ariel Huck-Porty is also on the roster, but he's clearly a project. The Knicks don't trust him with the larger minutes quite yet, even though he's done pretty well for himself. So what can the Knicks do at the deadline? I suggest they keep an eye on the trade block. Jonas Valanciunas out in Washington is certainly a name to keep an eye on. There's several big names. There are several big men out there that could really work with them. You could take a look at that situation in Portland. Will Robert Williams or DeAndre Ayton, will they be willing to part ways with them? But I think that the other thing you have to keep an eye on for the Knicks, they behave very financially prudent this offseason. In spite of adding all these big name talents, they have managed to remain outside of the NBA's restrictive second tax apron. So I think, and what that basically means, if they were to leap into it, they would be restricted in some of the moves they can do in terms of trades, in terms of signings and whatnot. So any deal that would be enacted, they could not take on more salary than they would give away, to put that basically in layman's terms. So interested to see what the Knicks do now. Should be a good game tonight. Should be an emotional homecoming for Mikal Bridges, who got a bit of the franchise face treatment during his brief time in Brooklyn. Was supposed to be, the face of the post Kyrie Irving, post Kevin Durant, post James Harden era of this team. So should be an emotional night, but look for the Knicks to prevail and look for them to generate a win. Look for them to generate a string of wins that they've been seeking for a long, long time.
It should be a good game tonight. Geoff, stay right there. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about the Eagles and the Baseball Hall of Fame. Stay with us. Welcome back. We're here still with Geoff Magliocchetti. Geoff, I want to move on to football. The Eagles beat the LA Rams in a very fun divisional playoff game this past Sunday. One of the things I absolutely love about football is that, unlike baseball, they play when the weather's bad. And it was really exciting to see snow play such a huge role in this game. The Eagles may have had the advantage if it were just about the cold weather, but in the snow, with the ball slip sliding all over the place and the players slip sliding all over the place, it was really anyone's game. And that said, the Eagles came out on top 28-22. They take on the Commanders next. As much as I hate to say it, they've got a real chance to win this whole thing.
Yeah, it would certainly appear so after Sunday. And love what you said about snow games, by the way. I always detest the take that, oh, every NFL game should be played in a dome. Oh, dome every NFL stadium. No. And what's funny is that the same people who complain about that will act like it's a personal offense when you suggest they support their local indoor or arena league. I believe it's actually coming back to Long Island this summer. So and Morristown, as a matter of fact. So if you love indoor football so much, support that. Okay, let it snow out in the NFL, because that's what truly separates the good teams from the great. Because the best teams know how to play against not only one but two opponents out there, both the team on the other side and Mother Nature. But beyond that, yeah, it should be an interesting NFC title game. Eagles, Commanders, and Washington has what I like to call 2017 Yankee syndrome, in the sense that they have stockpiled many decent talents, many strong faces, many players who should be able to guide this franchise into the future, that they have more or less bought themselves a consequence-free playoff trip. And that's what makes them especially dangerous. Now, it's fair to say that there's a good chance that reality could come back to strike them this week against an Eagles team that clearly wants to be back in the Super Bowl, clearly wants another chance at perhaps Kansas City after what happened a couple years back. But I think that it's great for Washington, and we're on the verge of seeing something special out of that group, provided, of course, there are no injuries, because there's been many false starts. Starts down in D.C. Robert Griffin III perhaps being the primary case. But this should be an interesting game in the sense that Washington has nothing to lose. Philadelphia is furious. They have everything to lose out there. I mean, what the Eagles have done, you have to say, has been extraordinary, in the sense that when they won that Super Bowl against New England, it appeared like that group, headlined by Carson Wentz and Doug Peterson, was going to be a problem for a long time. That wasn't the case. They fell a few years later, and shortly after, both of them were gone. They had to reload. So they come back with Jalen Hurts and Nick Sirianni. They spend over the offseason. They move. They wheel and deal up the draft board. Jalen Carter fell to number 9 in Philadelphia. That's incredible, and what they were able to do. But Carter, of course, did have his issues over at Georgia. But at the same time, Philadelphia was willing to embrace him, take him in, and molded him into a fearsome defensive player. So I think it speaks volumes to the culture that the Eagles have built over there. So should be an interesting NFC title game, as long as Philadelphia plays to their strengths, as long as they keep pushing forward, as long as they don't get caught looking ahead. It should be an Eagle victory, but Washington, do not underestimate them. Do so at your own risk. You could argue that Washington perhaps lucked into a decent-sized portion of the bracket. facing a Tampa Bay team that many were questioning. Oh, do they deserve a third seed? They took advantage of a weak division. Then they face a Detroit team who, while top seeded, while looking deadly, were dealing with many, many, many injuries on the defensive side of the ball. So they perhaps lucked into something great, but again, they took advantage. Good teams know how to take advantage of the situations presented to them. And that's why I think that, it's silly to fully credit the Kansas City Chiefs' success to solely on officiating. Now, granted, there have been some ridiculous calls over there, but Kansas City finds a way for its opponents to kind of beat themselves a little bit, and the Eagles are kind of in that same boat. So it should be a very interesting Sunday out in the NFL.
Time will tell. And finally, Geoff, the 2025 Baseball Hall of Fame inductees get announced tonight. A couple of former Yankees and Mets could be making the trip to Cooperstown this year.
Yeah, exactly. I like former Yankee Ichiro Suzuki, former Yankee Andrew Jones. So, yeah, Yankee legends. I always enjoy that game. But, yeah, this should be an interesting vote. Billy Wagner is on the ballot again, former Mets closer. 10th year on the ballot. Interested to see if he's able to get in. Carlos Beltran, former Met and would-be Met manager. Don't let that – I feel like so much of what Beltran was able to do in Queens was kind of obscured by the fact that he's best remembered for that gaffe at the end of the NLCS back in '06, looking at strike three. So I don't think his entire career should be judged by that. I think it's going to be interesting to see him get in. Ichiro Suzuki, if he's not a first ballot Hall of Famer, what the heck are we doing here? What are we doing?
A unanimous one. He should be
yes,
unanimous.
He should be unanimous.
Yes,
absolutely right. If he's not unanimous, what are we doing here? We have to overhaul the entire system if he's not in. But interested to see as well CC Sabathia come in. Did really well through Cleveland, Milwaukee, and then the Yankees in the end. Remains a beloved franchise face. And while he did get a start down there in Cleveland with the Indians, I think that I think he always kind of viewed himself as a true Yankee, always viewed himself as really a franchise face down there. Always a team first guy, so really eager to see he gets in, but should be an interesting reveal out there. Wagner, 10th year, come on, let the guy in. And David Wright, let's at least give him more than 6% of the vote this time around. Talk about one of the more, for lack of a better term, tragic cases in Mets history. A strong career derailed by injuries and whatnot, derailed by just bad luck. And another one toward the bottom of the ballot is Andy Pettitte. Yankee fans got to keep an eye on. He'll be this is his 7th year on the ballot, and he got 13%, I believe, last year. So he'll have to probably get a little more to stay on. So I feel like it's going to be an interesting, if not emotional, night for New York baseball fans, eager to see who comes out on top and who gets the call from Cooperstown.
And I love this time of year for that reason. Geoff Magliocchetti, always fun talking to you. Thanks so much for jumping on this morning.
Mike, I appreciate your time and insight. Thank you so much for having me on. Keep up the good work, sir.